Um, sorry, you see, I don't have a lot of credibility, right? You saw that the two books, you know, Nippon Keizai Korekara o Gonki e, right? Towards the New Japanese Code. You know when that was written? That was written in 1999. And so just afterwards, everything went down the tubes again. And then this other book is like The End of Heisei Deflation. Well, that was written, I think, in 2002. And, you know, there you go. You've got Mr. Abe now saying, well, my God, you know, we've got to make it 2% inflation. Well, so just a little, you know, it's sort of, I hope we can keep this sort of, you know, fairly casual here. But in all seriousness, I mean, I think that, you know, what you can take from that, it's good to be optimistic. It's good to have a, you know, an optimistic outlook. But at the same time, I think people need to be a little bit more humble, you know. And I think that if there's one lesson, you know, from Japan in the 1990s and even today, and then of course, you know, the Euro crisis, the Lehman crisis, and possibly what China is facing today, I mean, there's a lot of dynamics. Once you're in deflation, once you have a banking crisis, there's a lot of dynamics that really straightforward economics or straightforward modeling really doesn't provide much of an answer to. And, you know, I think, you know, if there's one message for the world, learning from Japan, and it's a discussion I have with the Federal Reserve, with the European Central Bank, and obviously with the Chinese policymakers as well, one lesson from Japan is you definitely want to be humble, you know, and leave open, you know, a lot of queries because there's a lot of room for error that comes through here. Now, I've been in Japan since 1985. That's me, you know, as a young man, not the fat guy. And, you know, I do have one of the most difficult jobs in the world because I am one of the last Japan optimists. And, you know, in my world, you know, the world of economics and finance and policy making, being a Japan optimist is kind of like somebody, you know, looking you in the eye and saying, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, he's still alive. You know, it's... Anyway, no, there are some big differences, you know, between Japan, you know, obviously, and Elvis Presley, because Elvis Presley really is dead, right? And what I want to do today is just sort of walk you through some of the logic, some of the thinking behind where the potential for Japan actually lies. And one thing that you will note in my presentation is that not a lot depends on policy. I've unfortunately had to learn the long way you know, that, you know, placing your bets on some particular politician or some particular set of policymakers, therefore everything is going to be fine, very difficult, right? And maybe Japan is special because every 9 months you have a new finance minister and every 12 months you've got a new prime minister. So there's a lot of change, very little credibility here, right? But, you know, everything or the predominant work that I do is really focusing on the private sector, focusing on households and focusing on corporations. If you get that right, I think you get the basic prospects for Japan correct. And, sorry, I guess I have to do my own slides. Ha! Okay, so I think, you know, as a good starting point, you know, I think 3/11, you know, the Fukushima crisis, you know, in my personal opinion, really did mark a big turning point for corporate managers in Japan. There's been a lot of debate, how do I change corporate behavior, right? Is it shareholder activism? Should the bankers get tougher on the corporations? You know, it's always been, you know, corporate Japan is good, but, you know, it's very slow. It's focused on gradual improvement rather than big step improvements. And I do think that 3/11 really did mark a turning point because it really shifted private sector priorities. And really what happened is that you were in the private sector, you all of a sudden realized if you don't take care by yourself, if you don't take matters into your own hands, you may not be around because the government is basically incompetent, you know, and you got to get on with things by yourself. So a lot of the plans that corporate managers in Japan had, whether it was large corporations or whether it was small and medium-sized companies, a lot of the plans that they've been studying, mo chotto kento shimashou, right? All of a sudden, okay, we're gonna have to act, because if we don't act, we may not be around in a couple of years' time. And so huge boom, huge pickup in corporate metabolism here. Big premium on action rather than debate. How do I prove it? How do you say a big pickup in corporate activism? Sounds very nice. How would you prove it? Well, M&A activity, right? If you look at M&A activity since April 2011, it really began to explode. Total M&A transactions compared to a normal year are up almost fourfold, right, since April 2011. So a big kickstart in corporate activity. And it's very interesting, of course, the big headlines are M&A going outside. You know, whether it is, you know, the Japanese drinks companies, whether it is Japanese, pharmaceutical companies, Japanese manufacturing companies, big push overseas. But you know what is exciting for me? Also, you're beginning to see, for the first time in my time in Japan, for the first time in 25 years in Japan, you're actually seeing a pickup in inward direct investment. And the example I want to give here, you know, is Sanyo Denki, Sanyo Electric. You may recall that Sanyo Electric was bought by the Panasonic Group because Sanyo Electric has one of the best batteries businesses in the world. Fantastic technology, good scale, and Panasonic Group bought Sanyo Denki for that. But of course, like all good Japanese consumer electronic companies, Sanyo Electric also makes light sockets, fans, refrigerators, you know, all these white goods, right? Now, what happened? In June 2011, Sanyo Electric, or Panasonic, sold out the white goods business, and who was the buyer? Chinese, Haier Corporation, right? And it was very interesting to me because there was no negative media campaign. There was no negative backlash, you know, from the politicians. And I can tell you, in my country, Germany, or in the United States, if a Chinese corporation buys into a major American corporation, that's a big deal, right? So it was really a match made in heaven. 1 + 1 = 3. And you can see, actually, I think it's widely acknowledged that, the purchase of Haier Corporation is a big success. They are raising employment right now. They're raising production. And of course, Haier Corporation is using the Aqua brand, which is the brand of Haier Corporation, as a step up into higher margin, higher luxury, sales, not just here in Japan, but using Japan as an export base of luxury brands or quasi-luxury brands, into Asia Pacific. That's a match made in heaven that's been going on. And I personally think, despite on the little rift that we've got right now with the People's Republic of China, in economic terms, the fact that there is this inward direct investment, right? And that Japan is now open to actually focus on core competence, spinning off some of the non-primary parts of businesses and being open for business, being open for capital from the rest of the world, that's a very, very big change and proves, in my opinion, that the metabolism is actually up here, that decisions, are being made to get us on growth. The other thing I also think, and this is my personal opinion, that within Japan, right, since Fukushima, the debate has changed a little bit. In one of my books, I said that, Japan is, and, it's, well, I'm a gaijin, so I can say it. Japan is like a makegumi tengoku, right? It's a loser's paradise, right? They take care of the jakusha, of the losers, very nicely. But against that, if you're winning, if you're the nail that sticks out, you get hammered back in very quickly, right? And I think since Fukushima, right, there's a little bit of a change in the debate. It's okay to be a winner. Of course, it was all helped by the fact that the Japanese women's football team, first beat the Germans and then the Americans, that obviously start off. It's okay to be a winner right now. And so if you look at the debate, the way, for example, Son-san's recent acquisition of Sprint is being debated in the media, well, he's still Son-san, but you know what? Maybe he's got the yaruki that is needed for Japan to actually be a success story. So I think the debate, it's okay to be a winner, right? That, again, is stirring up the so-called animal spirits in Japan. I also think that we've got, a couple of sticks that are on here. I'm not going to talk about politics until you ask a question, later on. But the fact of the matter is that, yeah, well, for all intents and purposes, we'd like some stable politics, but the base assumption is that things are going to stay unstable, for quite a while. And that for private corporations is a big incentive because the government is not going to help you. You're going to have to do things by yourself. You also do have gaiatsu in the fact that the world economy is not a strong place. You can debate America, you can debate Europe, you can debate the People's Republic of China, but it's very unlikely that global economic growth is going to go back to the sort of 3.5%, 4% growth rates over the next 5 years on average that we got, before the Lehman shock. So as a result of that, companies do need to focus on their core competence, do need to focus on their growth strategies. Nobody's going to help you. And then finally, I do think, a big change that is coming is the fact that Japan is turning into a net debtor country, that the current account is actually structurally falling into deficit. As a result of that, Japan needs to attract global capital to fund its current operations. Number one, you're an optimist on Japan. What's the biggest counter-argument that you get? And remember, I live in the world of finance. Financial people are weird. Well, they're not weird, They're just short-tempered because they can invest anywhere in the world, by definition. So I've got usually about 30 seconds to convince somebody you should focus on about it. You are all in Japan. You love Japan. We all like it. So it's natural that we get involved in Japan. But if you're somewhere in Houston or somewhere in Shanghai or somewhere in Frankfurt, London, or New York, I've got about 30 seconds to keep people's attention. And if I don't get that in the first 30 seconds, there's a big problem. So what's the big pushback you usually get? I'm bullish on Japan. How can you be bullish on Japan? Because what's the biggest negative of Japan? Anybody? Huh? Aging society. That's good. Anybody else? Lack of innovation. You obviously haven't been in a 7-Eleven today. Wonderful little bottles, Okay, lack of innovation. Okay. Unstable, unchanging politics. What else? A big deficit, the fiscal deficit, right? These are all very valid points, and they obviously come up. But, at the sort of 60,000 foot level, you talk about an economy. An economy is about productivity, right, which is innovation, right? But it's also about the population. And the big negative in Japan is, oh, Koro-san, how can you be positive on Japan? In Japan, look at the demographics. If you take the death and birth rate and extrapolate straight line out, you find that in 400 years, only 628 Japanese are going to be left. How can you be bullish on that? Now, the real number, you can do this on your Excel spreadsheet when you're bored one evening, right? But the really interesting number is that actually over the next 10 years, Japan is losing just about 1 million people every year, right? That's a very real number. The supply of labor really is shifting in, and you're very right to point out that you've got this aging, there's the Mick Jagger generation, that is just keeps on getting older, so that already 1 in 4 people is 65 or older, and that's going to get worse. And on the other side, on the input side, I'm running out of young people. 10 years ago, Japan produced, Japan produced 72,000 engineering graduates every year, right? That's a little unfair because they're people, it's not a good, right? But, 72,000 engineers, 10 years ago. Today, it's about half of that, right? And that number is going to continue to go down simply because of the young people actually dying out. I think you're aware with that wonderful statistics that there is more pet dogs in Tokyo than there is children under the age of 18. So there you have it. But that's the big negative. In my opinion, and the key crux of the argument on how to get bullish on Japan, right, is that actually Japan is now in a demographic sweet spot, okay? And let me explain what that is, all right? This is the way somebody gets paid in Japan, all right? And what happens, and apologize for the schematics, but that's exactly how it works. You know, you get paid a little bit, you know, until you're in your early 40s. When you're in your early 40s, your employment income really slingshots up, right? In fact, you know, statistically speaking, when you're in your early 40s, between your early 40s and 55, you on average get paid almost 5 times your productivity contribution. There's a big slingshot that actually happens, right? But the interesting thing is that you peak out when you're 55, right? And between 55 and the effective retirement age, which is 65, right? In those 10 years, you basically go down by slightly more than half. So your employment income, your take-home pay goes down very, very dramatically. And now it gets interesting, because I can explain to you of the stagnation in nominal national income. And as you know, GDP in Japan is back to where it was in 1993. It's basically flat. And you know, of that stagnation, statistically, you can explain almost 70% simply by the fact that the Mick Jagger generation, that the Dankai, that the baby boom generation was in this massive disinflationary downpull. Okay? So the good news is what? The good news is that basically the Dankai, the baby boom generation, that disinflation drag is now over. They're all taxi drivers. That's over, right? And against that, you have the children of the baby boomers, what they call the echo boomers here in Japan. That's a generation that's now in the sweet spot where slowly but surely wages are actually beginning to increase very, very dramatically, okay? So that's the thesis that I would pose to you, right? Disinflation drag over, Sedai Kotai, generational change happening, and actual pay increases coming through. I cannot prove that to you in the labor data as of today. I can prove to you that the labor market is tightening. Okay, demand is beginning to exceed supply, right? And you've seen a nice fall in the unemployment rate. The naysayers argue, aha, that's because of the Fukatsu. That's because of the demand to rebuild whatever is being rebuilt up in the north. So there are some bottlenecks that are starting to come through. But you can actually show at the company level that this slingshot of earnings is beginning to come through. For example, Japan's largest car company this year, for the first time in 12 years, is seeing domestic employment cost, domestic wages, actually going up by more than 3%. It's the first time in 12 years, and it's not because that car company is hiring more people or, you know, more engineers or more salespeople. It's entirely because the demographics internal of the people employed in Japan is now in this sweet spot where wages are beginning to accelerate quite nicely. So that's the thesis. Labor market indicators, you know, some you should see it, some you don't. But the real point of verification that I use, you say, that's a nice thesis. How do I prove that that's right? I look very closely at bank lending, okay? Because if this thesis is correct, what you would expect here, you've got 12% of the population, the echo boomers. For the first time in their working life, they're getting job security and pay increases. You would expect that for the first time in their life, they're actually going to step up, take out a mortgage, make that big investment, right? Which is your big investment is really buying a mansion, building a home, you know, closer to where it is that you're working, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And the good news is, you're probably aware that for the last 9 months, mortgage lending in Japan is actually growing. And it's the first time in about 20 years that there is a consecutive cycle of positive mortgage lending going on. Now, of that lending, about half is because of Tohoku. Okay, so you took out 6% of the housing stock, give or take, And there is some demand that comes through as a result of that. But the interesting thing is that mortgage lending in Tokyo, mortgage lending in Osaka, mortgage lending in Fukuoka is beginning to go up. And that, you know, to me is very, very interesting. So rising income for a new generation. Houses have become very cheap. If you calculate affordability of homes, right? Do you know how much it is now to buy the average apartment in Tokyo with the average income? It's 4.2 years of your income. How much was it at the peak of the bubble? 18 years of your average income. How much is it in Beijing today? 28 years of your average income. We can talk about China in the Q&A. Affordability, if you calculate it through, is basically at a 2-generation low, right? So rising incomes, better job security for a new generation. As a result of that, yosh, let's buy an apartment, build that home. Prove it to me. The bank lending data, I think, is going to be the key point going forward. And prediction, forecast for 2013, the naysayers say, Jesper, that's nice, but it's all going to go down again because the Fukatsu demand, the pent-up demand from Tohoku will start to fade out. As a result of that, bank lending is going to start to go down again, and it's sayonara, the usual thing. I think that that's going to be wrong. I look at bank lending, mortgage lending in particular. If that continues to grow, and in the spring and summer of next year is still positive, I think, you know, I'm going to walk around with a smile in my face, and indeed, it is the new Japanese golden age coming through. So that's the one point that you need. And get the argument. A lot of people who argue about Japan, what do they talk about? They talk about exports. They talk about monotsukuri. If I talk about exports, if I talk about monotsukuri, what do I talk about? I talk about America. I talk about China. I talk about Europe. Well, if you want to talk about America, if you want to talk about Europe, if you want to talk about China, why are you in Tokyo? Tokyo is about an endogenous economic cycle, and that's where the demographics, I think, is absolutely key. If you can make that case, then you've got a case for Japan. What about global competitiveness? This is my second favorite chart, right? Why should you care about Japan, right? The reason is because I'm incredibly rich. I mean, that's not me. I pay a lot of taxes. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, sorry. No, unfair. I get it. But look, I'm very, very rich. If you look at research and development, you said innovation, which is interesting. If I look at research and development, right, you see that throughout the 1990s, while the banks were bankrupt, while politics was very bad, right, you see that Japanese corporations continued to invest structurally into the future. R&D spending as a share of national income is about 3.4%, much higher than the United States, much higher than Germany, right? In fact, you know, only Israel basically, right, is stronger than that. Finland is a little stronger than Japan, but that doesn't really count. That's about the size of Shibuya-ku, right? Anyway, you know, and it's not to say that the rest of the world isn't sleeping, right? I mean, obviously Korea, you know, there's a lot of, you know, R&D spending going on. Global competition is intense, but Japan's, you know, starting point is actually very good. Case in point. How many of you have it? What's been the most important, most successful consumer product over the last 5 years? What do you think? Most important thing? iPhone. That's exactly, I mean, we now call them smartphone, right? But iPhone was the first one. The first iPhone, when it came out about 5 years ago, what percentage of components were made by Japanese companies? About 10%. It was a big shock. Japan went, oh my God, we've lost it, right? A lot of Korean stuff, a lot of Taiwanese stuff, you know, a little bit of Chinese stuff, 10%, oh my God, we're out, right? The new thing, what's that thing called? The iPhone 5, right? What percentage of components is made by Japanese companies? We reckon it's about 56%. And if I talk to engineers, right, the interesting thing is made by Japanese companies and more importantly, can only be made by Japanese companies. Because once you have a touch screen with that sort of sensitivity, once you have a capacitator with that sort of power, you have to go to a Japanese company. Because the Korean companies, the Taiwanese companies, the Chinese companies are not capable of delivering that sort of quality in that sort of production volume. So it's quite interesting. Of course, innovation you mentioned, right? There are cycles. Japan and Germany used to dominate, right? Well, now there's some excellent Korean products, there's some excellent Taiwanese products. It goes around, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But the point being that the fundamental strengths that Japan has, because of Shiteki Zaisan, because of intangibles, because of intellectual property, right? I mean, the fundamental strength is actually there. In my opinion, Japan is actually a resource-rich country. How many of you here are engineers? Okay, what do you think about Japan? Oh, you don't like it, it's not innovative enough. God, somebody take this guy out. No, not out of the room, sorry, I mean out on the town. You know, you need to, no. You're a civil engineer, you love Japan. Well, see, there you go, right? There was just an earthquake and nothing happened, right? I mean, it's kind of scary that nothing happens. I mean, but that's, you know. But again, you look, this is a rich country, right? There's a lot of, you know, and the question, of course, is how do I market? How do I get from having the great technology to actually commercializing it? And that's really where Japan's problem is, right? You know, Japan, basically, if you want the last 5% of manufacturing technology, you have to come to Japan. The problem is that over the last 20 years, right, the world didn't ask, I want the top 5%. The world said, how little can I get away with, right? So, you know, that's sort of, you know, an issue that you've got there, right? Cool Nippon, I mean, that stuff does actually pay off. Right? I mean, this is a survey that the Nikkei does every year, you know, and they ask, you know, in, you know, the emerging Asians, new consumers, the middle class, you know, do you think this country products are cool? And you see that basically made in Japan, you know, does continue to carry a very, very nice brand value. Do yourself a favor. The next time you're in Shanghai, well, okay, this thing that happened in the summer and keeps on happening is like a little disconcerting. But, you know, if it used to be, okay, I give you that. It used to be that, you know, if you went to Shanghai and you looked at the newspapers for the second-hand car market, right, you actually saw that a Lexus, relative to a comparable BMW or Mercedes-Benz, a Lexus typically carried 10 to 15% premium in the second-hand car market, right? And it'd be interesting to see, you know, whether with all this stuff going on right now, whether that sort of, you know, premium is being maintained. But for all intents and purposes, right, the brand recognition, you know, is still very high. So that gets me sort of to the Gemba, right? I mean, what I do for a living, right, is, you know, okay, you forecast the stock market, you forecast corporates. How do I forecast share prices? Well, at the end of the day, you got to get corporate profit right. If I can forecast corporate profits right, I basically get the markets right, right? Now, if you regress out and say, how does Japan make money? And you look at the listed companies outside of the banks, so the tradable goods companies, right? What you find that actually these guys are very competitive internationally, but, you know, domestically, if there is a change in domestic demand by 1%, corporate profits rise by only about 5%. If there's a change in global demand, corporate profits rise by more than 3 times, almost 4 times as much, by about 18%. And then obviously you've got some sling, you know, from the exchange rate because of offshore production and because of exports. Somebody explain to me, why do Japanese companies not make money in Japan? Explain. If you can explain that, by the way, you can. They heavily rely on the domestic market. That could be a good thing, right? But okay, elaborate. What's the basic problem with the Japanese companies? There's too much competition in the domestic market. That's what you mean, right? That is exactly right. There is too much competition in the domestic market, too many players in the industries. And then if you take that to the next level down, right? How many parts does the average car have these days? Do you know? The average car, you know, has about 20,000 parts in it. How many car parts makers are there in Japan? 98,000. Okay, that's like really also mom and pop shops, right? But I mean, there's a lot of things, right? Now, if you take that to the next level, it's very interesting, right? What really keeps the profit margins domestically very low, right, is the fact that Japan's merchandising, right, that the Japanese, you know, wholesale business, right, is very, very large. This country today has 380,000 wholesalers. But of the 380,000 wholesalers, 2/3 do not have a customer who is a producer or a retailer. In other words, 2/3 of all the wholesalers are a middleman to another middleman. They collect the margin in between, blah, 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 blah. And if you look at the successful restructuring stories, like look at Nissan, what did Carlos Ghosn do? Well, he cut out the middleman very, very aggressively, right? So restructuring in Japan, increasing profit margins here, could be quite easy if you had some sort of, and I'm going to use this European word, Schumpeterian distraction, right, of the supply chain, right? Some companies are doing that. Yamada Denki, for example, right, is very busy, right, streamlining the supply chain there. But many other companies, you know, because they're nice guys, right, and because their cost of capital is actually very low, right, as a result of that, they keep this in place. But globally, I'm very, very competitive, right, and globally, I do make a lot of money. And so what happened is that, of course, companies invest where the money is. Invest where profit margins are high. And so particularly after Fukushima, with this burst of corporate animal spirits, right? Look at this. This is from the Seisaku Ginko of the large companies in Japan. Where does your seicho toshi, where does your investment for growth, where do you do it? Outside of Japan or inside of Japan? And you see that, you know, basically used to be about ton-ton, about half-half, right? But over the last year, this has really exploded out very, very aggressively, which in economic terms makes sense because that's where your profit margins are, right? But of course, you know, there are some negative implications for the domestic economy there, right? Look at the globalization that's going on. This is just the car industry, right? If you look at, you know, the major car companies in Japan, you find that, you know, before last year, they basically had about 65% of their productive capacity outside of Japan. That, on the targets they put in place, is going to go to 75%. So this big push, this big globalization goes out. Now, my job is to forecast profits. Profit margins on offshore operations, on average, are 3.5 times what they are on domestic factories. So I look at something like this, I look at something like this, and I smile. I'm just a cold-hearted capitalist. I'm supposed to forecast profits. The more you make overseas, where the margins are higher, the bigger your earning stream is going to be. So in financial terms and for the stock market terms, why am I optimistic on Japan? I can actually look you in the eye and say, well, if, you know, indeed this trend of greater offshore production increases, right, that means structurally the earning stream of corporations in Japan is going to be improving, right? And you can calculate this out, blah, 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 and you find that the Nikkei, you know, should be able to go to 16,000, right? Anyway, sounds nice. It's at 8,000, something like that today. One implication, though, that you've got is this third point. First point, demographic sweet spot with the Mick Jagger generation. Second point is that you've got Shiteki Zaisan. You do actually have intellectual property, right? Fourth point I want you to take home tonight is that it is indeed sayonara creditor country, right? Most academics think that structurally Japan is going to fall into a current account deficit, right? By 2020, 2022. We actually think that that's going to happen much earlier, right? Indeed, by the time Germany wins the World Cup in Brazil in soccer, Japan will be a structural deficit country, right? Why is that? Well, you see the trade deficit already is gone. The trade account has already gone into deficit, right? And people say, oh, well, that's because of this, which is the fact that I went ex-nuke, so my import bill increased, by about 30%. Sooner or later, they're going to switch the nukes back on, and everything is going to be hunky-dory, right? I don't want to argue about pro-nuke or not pro-nuke, right? The fact of the matter is they haven't switched them back on, right? And it's unlikely to be switched on, in scale, in the foreseeable future. But the much more important point that you need to be aware of is this, that I've got this structural deterioration in the terms of trade. The terms of trade is a country's profit margin, basically, right? If you think of it this way. And you find that import prices keep on being under upward pressure, right? That's basically commodity prices, right? As well as food prices, right? If the world economy is fine, I mean, if we go into recession, it's all different. But if the world economy is reasonably fine, food prices and commodity prices are going to stay relatively big, right? The other thing is export prices. You see here that Japan is losing some of its pricing power on exports. I said that I've got great products. I've got fantastic Shiteki Zaisan. That's true. But the world is becoming more competitive. For example, when Toyota developed its Lexus strategy, who were their competitors? The Germans, right? BMW, nobody competes with BMW. They're on a different planet. No, that's actually Porsche, but that's not part of Volkswagen. That's all complicated. But you're right. I mean, it was basically the Germans, right? But now, when you look at Hyundai or even Kia in the United States, even in the sort of, upper, sedan level or even in the luxury level, they're starting to be competitors. And that means that there's going to be less price power, right, for the Japanese going forward. It's not a good thing, not a bad thing. It's just the reality. Global competition is very much there. So you look at this trend, deterioration in the terms of trade, if this continues as we expect, right, what happens is that indeed, you can run various simulations there that basically by the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, Japan is going to be in a structural current account deficit. And what does that mean? Well, that's the third thesis, right, that you have. What are the implications? What happens if structurally Japan starts to run current account deficits? What happens? Anybody? What does that mean? Huh? So Japan needs to attract capital from the rest of the world, okay? One of the implications for that is that I actually need to work hard, right? So my capital here, the capital that I employ in Japan, in order to attract capital from the rest of the world, all of a sudden, I'm competing with the global return on capital, return on asset, right? And by the way, given the fact that after the Lehman crisis and the European crisis, fixed interest rates are now basically the same everywhere. I mean, everybody has zero interest rates. It used to be, hey, I'm the only guy with zero interest rates. Now everybody has basically the same interest rate structure, right? So if I need to attract capital, while interest rates in nominal terms are basically the same, my return on other assets, so on equity or other assets, should start to be going up. What's the second implication? So it's interesting. This is where it gets interesting, and we should have a lot of German wine and Japanese, osake, right? Because I've got this deficit that I need to fund, the public deficit, right? And if I need to attract money from the rest of the world, yes, I need to get more efficient, right? But how do I attract the global capital? Well, if I can have higher bond yields, right? Or I can have a weaker exchange rate. And now it gets interesting. I arrived in Japan on June 11th, 1985. Anybody remember what dollar yen was at the time? Huh? Dollar yen was exactly 260, all right? So I was a graduate student who got paid $1,000 at the end of the month. I was in heaven. I hated the Plaza Accord because I became very poor very quickly. But it's funny, right? Companies tell me, oh, why is there this burst of activity, Japanese companies doing more M&A overseas? Oh, it's because the yen is so strong. And I look at them and say, what? The yen's always strong. It started at 260. At one point, it started at 360, right? Maru, right? You know, the yen has continued to appreciate, right? That's nothing new. Every corporate planner in Japan basically assumes that the yen appreciates by 2 to 3%, right? And one of the underpinnings, one of the reasons for why the yen continues to increase or has continued to increase is because Japan was a big current account surplus country, was a big creditor country. If this is right and Japan structurally turns into a debtor country, I can actually look you in the eye and say we are at a turning point. That indeed one of the big underpinnings for why the yen has strengthened over the last 2 generations or 3 generations, one of these underpinnings is going away, and structurally from here the yen ought to be a weaker currency. I'm not going to forecast that the yen goes to 100 or 105. It's all more complicated than that. But structurally, with the current account falling into a deficit, right, it's very likely that the yen is going to be weak rather than strong. And this is what is interesting. Because again, if you look at corporate Japan, right, the yen has been a big problem. This is a calculation. You're selling a car in America. America is the largest car market, China, okay. America is, of real cars, the largest market in the world, right? Because some of these things in China, sorry, have you ever drive a Geely? I mean, it's like, woo, nice. You know, anyway, so this is, you're selling a car in America, right? Which is, you know, high margin business, right? This is how things break down, right? This is your cost, right? For a Japanese company, a Korean company, and a German company. It's quite interesting. People complain about labor costs. Labor costs is actually not the big deal. German labor costs are much higher, right, than Japanese labor costs, right? Energy costs in Japan, you know, are a little bit higher than certainly in Korea, right? I've got slightly different depreciation charges here, you know, but if you look at operating profit margins, you know, yes, the Koreans are higher, right? But, you know, actually the Germans are lower than that, right? Then you look at what actually is left after interest expense and after taxes, right? You actually see that now you're already in a much more level playing field vis-a-vis Germany. But really the big change over the last 5 years on average has been the fact that there is this currency appreciation. So if I take the currency appreciation away, right, I can actually begin, you know, to compete quite nicely in terms of, what I mean by compete is actually making money for the owners of capital. Right? So I just wanted to highlight, you know, how important the exchange rate actually is in what still is, you know, one of the key industries here. So, good news, demographics. Good news, excellent intellectual property and brand value, right? Good news, the easy money is no longer there. You're going to have to sweat your assets, right? And one of the implications is likely to be, you know, a bit of a tailwind from the currency coming forward. What's the bad part of Japan? We talked about demographics. That's the big perception. But in economic terms, in money terms, it is this. I've got a lot of debt, right? Debt to GDP, you know, is basically here as far as government debt is about 230%. You know, you got to look into total leverage. So you look at financial corporation, non-financial corporation, households. It's actually interesting. Households in Japan are not that levered, right? Corporations in Japan, you know, are also not levered, right? Financial institutions, you know, certainly against our friends in England, right, are not that levered either, right? You see that by segment, you know, this balance sheet adjustment that has happened from the peak of the bubble economy, you know, the household sector basically was never a problem, right? Japan's balance sheet problem, Japan's bubble economy was not about the household. It was about corporations. Corporations had excess leverage. A lot of it got paid back there. Financials, again, not that much of a problem. But the issue is that we've had this massive explosion in public sector debt, right? Just in contrast to America, in America, the problem is the household sector and the deleveraging, right, that has been occurring in the United States there, right? The point being, however, got this debt, there's been some adjustment. The problem is, and this is the saddest statistics of Japan, this is the tax multiplier. What does that tell you? What's a tax multiplier? Shizen's issue, right? So if and when the economy starts to grow, how fast will tax revenues begin to grow? All right? It's like when you analyze a company. There's nothing wrong with taking out debt. The question is, what's your efficiency, what's your ability to pay back the debt once your income starts to rise? That's the key point. And that's what this thing tries to do, right? And so a good or a normal multiplier would be about 1, which is to say when national income, when GDP grows by 1%, tax revenues grow by 1%. That's fair. The pie grows by 1%. The public part of the pie grows by 1% as well. And most systems, indeed operate on that sort of basis. The problem with Japan is the fact that the tax system is actually one of the least efficient tax systems in the world, right? You cannot, with the current tax system, Japan cannot grow itself out of the debt problem. So you need to change the tax system, right? Which is finally what they're trying to do by raising the VAT, right? Which is nice, right? On its own, I don't think it solves any problem, right? Because you still need economic growth, right? If you just cut the purchasing power of the people, right? That's nice, but net, nothing is going to be happening. So it's kind of kurushi, for Japanese politicians. And, we can have a discussion about what to expect or what not to expect, after December the 16th there. But I want to make this point very clearly. The tax system in Japan is the problem, right? Raising, the tax efficiency by taxing people at the point of consumption rather than at the point of income, makes a lot of sense. And in fact, has been discussed in Japan for 40 years. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to act upon it, right, in due time there. The real challenge for politicians, of course, is this. It's my favorite economist. It's a Frenchman, which is surprising for a German. But you see, we Europeans, we all love each other. But look, this is the reality. Taxes are a stick, right? Because you're going to have to pay higher taxes, therefore you're going to work harder, doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? So the question is, how can you empower people? So what are the growth sectors in Japan? If you give me $100 million to invest in Japan, where would I invest it in, right? And, that's basically the sectors that I would choose. Lifestyle superpower of the old. It's natural. I mentioned 1 in 4 people is 65 or older. We at JP Morgan reckon that healthcare spending in Japan over the next decade, every year, is going to grow by between 5 and 6%. GDP, the overall economy, even with a bullish outlook, is going to grow on average by about 1.5%. Healthcare spending is a big growth industry in the Japanese economy. You've got demographic tailwinds for creature comforts for the olds. Okay, it's a growth industry. It's widely recognized. What's the problem? What's the problem? So the Japanese government, a year ago, calculated that there is a shortage of 750,000 healthcare workers in Japan. Kangofu, Kaigo, right? A shortage of 750,000 healthcare workers in Japan. Okay? It's a growth industry. There's a shortage of 750,000 healthcare workers in Japan. So I was with Is he still the prime with Mr. Noda, 6 months ago or something like that? And we talk, where's the growth industry in Japan? It's healthcare. Oh, but you said that there is this shortage. And he goes, Kono-san, その移民政策のことちゃんと考えてるよ. So we're thinking about immigration policy. And I said, what does this have to do with immigration? I mean, look, there's a shortage, right? Oh, we want the Filipinas and the Indonesians, right? Well, wait a minute. Let's look at that test. If you take the healthcare, the nursing test, right? You basically got to go to school for 3 years. You take the test. What's the pass rate of the Japanese nationals? Do you know? Barely half of the Japanese people that take the test pass the test. Only 2% of the Filipinos pass it. I couldn't pass it. You couldn't pass it, right? I mean, the test is way too difficult. I mean, come on. I want you to change my diaper, not to win the Nobel Prize in applied medicine. Okay, healthcare debate is a funny debate, right? Oh, you shouldn't be thinking about money. Whatever, right? It's all complicated. Have you looked at the economics of healthcare? If you're a nurse in Japan, you've done 3 years of training, you passed that test, you work in a highly regimented business, lots of rules and regulations there, right? You can only stay with the patient for exactly 90 seconds, not possibly more, right? Wonderful. The Japanese are really good at this stuff, right? So you do this job. How much money do you make? You work for 10 years. You make, on average, about 250,000 yen per month. How much money do you make if you work part-time at the Starbucks down there by Hanzomon Eki? Exactly. It's about the same. And while I work at Starbucks, I can still keep alive the dream of becoming a rock musician. The people are rational. The people are totally rational, right? So Kangofu Shotoku Baizo Keikaku, a double income plan, right, of nurses, I think would do a lot to actually arbitrage the people into the thing. Shortage of over 700,000. Japan's youth unemployment rate is where? It's about 10%, right? It's the highest in history. You don't run out of labor. Japan doesn't have a hitode busoku. There is no shortage of labor yet. Eventually, there may very well be one. Then let's talk about immigration and some other potential policies. But right now, let's make no mistake, it's political rules and regulations that prevent the arbitrage from actually happening. The price mechanism does not work. Agri-power, I think is another wonderful thing in Japan. I mean, this is my nursing slide. Look at it, isn't that cool? Right? Really nice. Look at this. Do you know this guy? You know him? He's fantastic, right? Absolutely spectacular. These things, you know how much one of these costs? Huh? You do, right? $1,600, almost exclusively sold in the Middle East. The guy's a genius, right? And look at this agriculture. How cool is this? Of course, the real problem is that, in Japan, you have very inefficient agriculture. If you do the calculation, unfortunately, the productivity of agriculture in Japan is about 1/3 of that of Italy, and Italy is the worst in Europe. And the reason is that the average plot size in Japan is teeny, right? Very small, it's less than 2 acres, right? The level of mechanization in Japan, fantastic agricultural machinery technology, but it's all underemployed. You can't utilize it very effectively. So if you had land reform for agriculture, and you could actually get scale into the system, and it's not the nature that is the scale. I know that Japan is not Kentucky, right? But Kentucky doesn't grow rice. We're not asking Japan to grow, to this. But you can actually calculate if the productivity of land, of agricultural land in Japan, could go to Italy's level. You could calculate that Japan could actually become a net exporter of food, right, in many areas, right? So that's quite interesting, and there's obviously a big distortion mechanism, right, in the way agricultural policy in Japan, has been run. So agriculture, I think, is a very big potential, potential growth sector. Energy, right? Energy can become a very emotional debate. It's interesting. I did this once, and I always get into trouble with this. But who actually makes the money in Japan? Well, you're not allowed to talk about money in Japan, right? We're all the same, right? Well, look, this is how much the average Japanese makes, right? this is how much you make if you work in industry, right? You see that I actually made the wrong career choice, right? I should have become a public servant, right? Or work for utilities companies. So why is the political of Japan's energy policy, the political economy of Japan's energy policy so complicated? Well, there's a lot of vested interests, right, that are in there. I'll leave that for debate otherwise. You know, tourism, I mean, Tokyo is seriously cool. I don't have to convince you of that. I always convince my business people. It's like, look, you know, Tokyo is actually one of the most efficient cities to actually do business in, right? There's 51 companies, you know, that are in the Fortune 500 who are headquartered in Tokyo, right? So it's a very effective way of actually doing business here. Last word, challenge to you, all right? It's a great symbol of Japan, I think. The yen is the only currency of the G7 world that actually floats on water. So I make a challenge to you. The next time you're bored or, you know, at a party, do this, take a picture, send me the picture back, and in a year's time, we select, you know, who made the coolest picture of the yen actually floating on water. Thank you very much. I hope the message was reasonably clear, right, in terms of where we are. And I'm very happy to, you know, engage in some debate and discussion. There are obviously no perfect answers. It's the debate that makes things interesting. Thank you very, very much for having me. Then tell me who you are, why you're here, and what you want to be.
What I want to be. Oh.
Yeah, okay, do that too. Come on. It's,
okay.
Come on, guys.
Hi,
you know?
My name is Wilson Chan. I'm actually a full-time student at Globus.
Okay.
In their full-time MBA program.
From
Canada.
From Canada. Okay,
Yes, from Canada.
good. The right part of Canada or the wrong part?
Don't know yet.
Okay, good.
Okay, and then what I want to be is I want to actually be a Fortune 500 CEO.
Okay, a Fortune 500 CEO. There you go. Canadians have ambition.
Yes, some of us.
Does Canada have any Fortune 500 companies? Haha, sorry.
It used to. Okay, actually, when you were talking about the kind of the slide of the 65-year-olds and the income actually decreasing, what's actually the next linchpin to bring, like you said, now the slingshot, it's in the sweet spot right now. But as you said, after the Tohoku and everything, you're expecting some of the growth to actually decrease, right? So the linchpin going on forward to carry on this momentum, right? Because if you look at it, what you're saying is 1 in 4 is over 65 right now. And then you're talking about the productivity of the pay is 5 times. Right. So you still can't make up that 10% difference. So where is the other growth coming from?
It's very, very interesting, right? Because, you know, that's the key question. I mean, where's income growth, right, over and above going to be coming from? So where are the new growth sectors going to be, right? And, you know, I mean, here is Abe talking about an inflation target, right? And I mean, look, I mean, that sounds nice, but it's also horrible. I mean, if I get just prices increasing by 2%, right, that's horrible. My purchasing power goes down. If I get wages begin to increase by more than 2%, and I've got inflation of 2%, I'm perfectly fine, right? So that's the real trick, you know. Where is it going to come from? I can only point, you know, to these growth sectors, you know, where there is a potential, right? And whether it is the healthcare area, whether it is in the agricultural area, whether it is, you know, in areas that need ultimately deregulation, right? Now, you've got one additional positive driver that is there, which comes from the fact, I mean, it's really very simple economics. You've got the supply of labor, and you got a demand. But in Japan, the supply of labor is shifting in. Fewer numbers of university graduates, right? So sooner or later, the wages should start to be bid up, right? Because there's a scarce resource, right? And whether that is the car industry, whether that is the steel industry, whether that is, you know, the Ministry of Finance, you would expect to see, you know, some upward wage pressure beginning to come through. But the real crux of the matter, in this respect, I will have to say, you do need political deregulation and, you know, allowing for the Japanese young people to actually earn higher incomes, right? Dozo. Ha. Well, come on, we flip on.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is David. I'm from Miami, Florida, in the United States. I like long walks on the beach and candlelit dinners.
And what's your dream? Okay, go back to those long, invade Cuba. No, that.
Oh, my dream, be able to die before I run out of money.
To be able to die before you run out of money. Okay, well that's a good dream. That's God. I mean, you know, this is a Canadian being very concrete. I want to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and this is like an American who's like, yeah, well, you know, I'll be good.
Things are going all right at the moment, thanks. As far as political deregulation goes, I love the drive. I think it's a really important thing and a really amazing thing. With the demographic shift and the voting power going towards the older generations who are going to want to maintain the status quo, how do you see voting and political change in that kind of relationship?
It's very interesting because, you know, I think that, you know, I actually think, you know, that the aging Japanese, right, are not stupid. Yes, I've been a net beneficiary, and remember, I mean, I had this big demographic deflation pull, right? That actually wasn't because of some nasty restructuring that corporate Japan did, but simply because of the demographics and the way I pay people in Japan traditionally, right? I think, though, that, you know, 1 in 4 over 65, people are beginning to recognize that the only way your pension is going to be safe is if your children and your grandchildren actually earn significantly more money, right, to pay the pensions, right? So I think from that perspective, deflation is induced by the way Japanese democracy works, right? You know, old people who live off assets prefer deflation, right? I think that that's going to start to flip, right? In the sense of that actually the Japanese are proud enough, want to see their own country, you know, not just survive, right? But actually, you know, maintain its status as one of the dominant economic powerhouses. And in fact, that's the one thing I will say, in my personal opinion, that Mr. Abe touches upon, right? In the sense of that, look, you want a strong country. If you want to be able to stand up to China, right, just as a partner, as an equal partner, you have to be a strong country, right? And I think that, you know, from that perspective, you know, that the, you know, the voting per se, right, is going to, you know, support, you know, more of a pro-growth attitude rather than a let's share it out and screw the younger, is this being taped? And screw the younger generation forever.
Like, though, if I could just follow up real quick,
Sure.
that in the private sector, there really is a whole lot of that kind of aspect of screw the younger generation.
I completely disagree. Okay, here's what's interesting. Let me give you a counter. I'm sorry, I didn't put that in a slide. Okay, Japan is cool, unbelievably cool. Why is this? Okay, who's Japan's richest man? Anybody? Huh? Who is Japan's richest man? Oh, you've been in Japan too long. We can't talk about money. That's terrible. Couldn't possibly talk about money. Who is the richest man in Japan? Mr. Yanai, right? He runs a thing called Uniqlo, fast retailing. Did that company exist 20 years ago? No, it did not, right? Who is the third richest man in Japan? Mr. Yamada, as in Yamada Denki. Where does Yamada Denki come from? Anybody know? Mr. Yamada was a little guy, right, bullied in school, who inherited a small mom and pop shop in Maebashi, right? He had 0.00001 market share of selling fans, white goods, and things. Every year for the last 20 years, Mr. Yamada has bought at least 2,000 other small and medium-sized, you know, mom and pop shops. He today, what's his market share in white goods and electronic goods retailing? Anybody? 21%. His share is twice as high as that of Walmart in the United States of America. This guy came from nowhere, changed radically, right, the way the system was. Because if I've got 0.1% market share and I have a negotiation with Sony or with Panasonic, what do you think when these guys meet? Who bows deeper? It's pretty clear, right? The 0.1% guy. When you've got more than, pick a number, 3% market share, what do you think who bows deeper, right? Phenomenal. Only in Japan, right, is this possible. Third richest man in Japan. Fifth richest man in Japan, Mr. Mikitani, Rakuten, right? That's a company that didn't exist until the Kobe earthquake, right? And again, it's retailing, right? If you look at those companies and you look at the fluidity that the Japanese system actually provides, I mean, how long has Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett, how long have these guys been at the top, right? If you look actually at the rich people, on the Forbes list, Japan is one of the highest fluidities, right, in terms of newcomers actually entering the system. So it's very interesting, and my proposition is that if you look at those sectors, right, a Hitachi Corporation is no different from Siemens. Dare I say, who do I work for? I mean, we are big Death Stars, right? So I think, if you look elsewhere, right, you actually do see a tremendous amount of energy. And also, the way people are being compensated, is beginning to be much, much more on a, profit-based, right, on a performance-based basis, right, rather than the old traditional system of just paying people on the basis of seniority.
There we go. Okay, thank you for an interesting speech. I'm Peter Lackner. I work with G Plus Media. We run the Japan Today website, the news website,
Okay.
and also the job site for eCentral and Gaijin Pot. So if you need a job, shameless plug, sorry. One question. So you mentioned that Japanese companies
Your dream?
My dream is
To get a job.
Yeah, to get a better job. I have a job site to get a better job.
Checking at his job site all the time.
To become a nanadan in kendo is my dream.
Oh, so there you go.
Okay.
Wow, okay.
But that'll be 20 years down the line. But my question is, you're saying Japanese companies are leveraging the yen and investing outside of Japan. Isn't that going to kill the job market here?
It's very interesting.
I have a couple more questions.
No, but it's interesting. Oh my God, there's Kudoka, right? There is this hollowing out of Japan, and it's all terrible, and we all get unemployed. All right? Komatsu. Remember Komatsu? Komatsu, 8 years ago, right, closed a factory, fired 7,000 people the hard way, right? And Komatsu today, what's their overseas production capacity? It's 85%, right? And it's going higher. Komatsu, however, today employs exactly 11,000 people more in Japan than it did before the restructuring. Why is that? Headquarters nations. So the R&D, right? The marketing, the finance, the brand management, right? All takes place here, which is high value added work. I mean, who wants to work in a factory? I hope none of us. I don't think so, right? So it's quite interesting, empirically speaking, right? Because of a shift in overseas production to overseas, as a result of that, you've got large job losses. Empirically, it doesn't hold up, right? So just using Komatsu as an example, right? If you look at employment in industry, et cetera, there is really very, very little empirical correlation, right, between the two. Because, the shift towards the service industry, right, and the shift towards higher value-added stuff taking place in Japan, while the lower value-added production, assembly, et cetera, takes place outside of Japan, has been managed very, very successfully.
No, I like that, just but not everybody can be an executive, so not everybody has a high education.
Well, look, I mean, the nice thing is that the Japanese on average are very highly educated, right? That they are actually highly creative, right? And, that the flexibility that you bring to the job, right, is actually very, very high. Certainly compared to some of the rigidities you've got in the labor market, particularly in Europe, right? Where it's very, very difficult, to turn somebody from, being a low-level engineer, right, towards a marketing guy. Here in Japan, that seems to work quite nicely. What was the question over there?
Thank you, sir.
What is that sticker you've got?
Oh, this is my company logo, actually.
What is? Oh, great. So oh.
Yes, my name is Yusuke Teguchi. I work for a company called YSI Japan.
Okay.
Yes.
And what does YSI Japan do?
It's short for Yellow Springs Instruments. Yellow Springs in Ohio,
Okay.
United States.
And what kind of, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar.
Yes, it's a very small company, very niche market, but we provide instruments that measure water quality,
Okay, wow.
something environmental.
You must be booming.
Sort of, yes.
Sort of, yes, says he with his, it's okay. It's okay to be ambitious. You make money. That's great.
And my dream would be, it's maybe it's a bit ambitious, but I'd like to appear in the history books for doing something good, not bad.
Nice. Wow, okay.
And my question is, when Mr. John Roos spoke, just like you did here a few months ago, and he mentioned how he values, he views as a distinct value that Japanese people can provide is, one thing is attention to details,
Right.
which I actually do share his opinion. I'm sure there's a few more other things, but would you view such things like some things that can't be determined by monetary
No,
ways as one of the intellectual assets that you mentioned that Japan has? And in that view, how would you say that works as a positive effect for the Japanese people working in the global market?
It's very interesting. I mean, this is a very complicated debate, right? Because, you know, there's not necessarily a monetary value to attach to that. People get offended. Oh, the Japanese have attention to detail. Well, have you ever met a Swiss person? I mean, they can drive you nuts with their attention to detail. And trust me, I'm German. We're pretty good at details as well, right? So, you know, it's, you know, but certainly we all understand exactly what it is that you're saying, right? And how is that working to advantage? And now you're the expert in the field, so I hope I'm not opening up myself to a problem here. But look at this, right? This is what happened after Fukushima. This is, you know, the cesium levels, you know, that are allowed in, you know, the major food groups, right? And I mean, you see, obviously, you know, that, you know, Japan went completely overboard, right? Or I'm not an expert on this. I can't pass a value on that, right? But this setting very high standards and actually achieving them because of this attention to detail, right? I mean, to even build a measure, you're the expert on this, to even build a measurement instrument that can pick up that amount of detail, right, is a huge, you know, engineering and technological challenge. So the Japanese are actually very, very good at that, right? So I was with, just, you know, to give you an example, you can do this only in Japan, right? I was with the LDP, you know, last week, right? Oh, if we win the election, what should we do, right? It's not, there's like 2 white guys left, and so they you know, I'm one of the guys whom they invite. I mean, there's nothing special, right? But the dope part is like, you know, one of the things that you want is, you know, you want to think about Kisei Kyoka, right? The tightening of rules and regulation to actually force progress, to force innovation, both in terms of engineering innovation, but also in terms of manufacturing innovation. So look at the nuclear debate. I'm not an expert on nuclear. I have no opinion on Genpatsu or not Genpatsu. I mean, I do, but I'm German. But the point being is like, fine, set a higher standard, right? You say, fine, there's going to be technological progress for renewable energy. There's also going to be technological progress for nuclear energy. I mean, that goes together, right? So you as a government set a higher standard. If you say, fine, you must build a reactor that has twice the output power and twice the safety standard, not the earthquake safety standard, but the operational safety standard, than the current reactor, then we're going to give you the green light. And I'm 100% convinced that the Japanese engineering companies will be able to achieve that goal in half the time, right, that would be necessary. It's very similar to what California did with car emissions, right? You set a high hurdle, and everybody thought, that's crazy, we can't possibly do it. Well, actually, the Japanese companies, as you know very well, right, achieved that hurdle, right, basically about 8 years, you know, ahead of anybody else, right? So from that perspective, this nesshin, right, being, you know, focused, having attention to detail, and not giving up, right, until you actually achieve the goal, which is a great quality to have in any human being, right? You know, using that as an incentive, put a higher challenge. You are supposed to win the gold medal, right? That's, I think, you know, where the government can actually come down. So it's the opposite of byodo, right? Set higher goals. So a 2% inflation target is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I hope, did that kind of answer your question? Okay, you're very kind. Please. Just pass it through the row. Dozo. No, it doesn't either.
Thank you for your speech. It's very nice. My name is Gordon Gall. I work for Konica Minolta Holdings. I do HR.
Right.
And one of my dreams is to pioneer what I think is going to be an influx of non-Japanese into Japan to
Excellent.
cover a labor shortage.
Yep.
So I kind of have an HR question, and that is, do you think that Japanese companies can be competitive with what I think what seems to be a overly fat companies with just, it seems like extra employees? Do you think they can be competitive? Do you think there are too many employees in Japanese multinationals?
Look, it's, it depends on the time of the year as a manager when I think there's too many people in my department and when there's not enough, right? It's a big challenge, right? But I think, if you, again, empirically, if you look at labor cost, and I just showed you the example of the car industry, right? Labor cost is really not the big issue, right? It may vary a little bit, from industry to industry to industry, right? But because of high labor costs, therefore Japan is inefficient, empirically just doesn't really hold, right? The problem may be a different one, right? Which is that Japan is not very good at empowering individuality and empowering diversity, okay? I give you an example, and you're in HR, you're the expert there, right? This goes back to the immigration debate, right? Well, remember when we were at the peak of the IT bubble, everybody had a shortage of IT engineers, right? And so the Japanese actually changed the visa requirements, right? And so it became easier, right? If you had an IT background, right, an IT degree, it became much easier to be employed, in Japan. So within 6 to 9 months of that rule change, I was at Merrill Lynch at the time, right? Within 6 to 9 months of our IT department, right, 50% were from the Indian subcontinent, right? The same for all the other non-Japanese companies, right? However, at the domestic companies, securities or the banks, no change. Now, why is that? Well, if you run an HR department on the basis that you've got recruitment from basically 5 universities, right? And of the 5 universities, they all went to the same 3 clubs, right? And your outside experiment is somebody, who sort of spent, 6 months in Hiroshima or in Kobe, right? You see what I'm getting at. And if you have an employment system that rewards people basically on the basis of seniority, there's huge, in terms of what job responsibility do you have, there is, of course, I'm very aware, differentiation in Japanese corporations, right? But in terms of allowing lateral entry, right? In terms of encouraging people to actually be successful, right? That's where there's a big problem. We have this issue even in the Gaishike, right? We had a wonderful case, right? And I'm going to tell you where. We had a wonderful case, right, where we had a problem in tax accounting, as one does, right? And so you go around and sort of say, who is the guy, when you've got a problem with tax accounting, who do you go to? And they go, oh, Ishii-san, right? You go to the next guy, right? And if you've got a problem with him, oh, Ishii-san, right? Go to the next guy, who do you go? Ishii-san. So we're looking for a new guy to become the head of the tax accounting division, right? And so you have this management meeting, and you go like, who, we've done the work. Everybody says it's Ishii-san. Let's make Ishii-san the boss. No, can't do it. Why not? Because there's Watanabe-san, who is 3 years his senpai, and it's his, it's his turn to get the job. Wow. I mean, look, hey, if I were, you know what I mean? And Ishii-san, of course, is terribly, sort of, oh, I couldn't possibly take the job because there's Watanabe-san. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. It's not, it all works out in the end, but because there is a lack of transparency, right? And you waste a lot of time building the whole Nemawashi thing, right? That's a problem, right? That you've got. So with the immigration issue, right? If you look at corporations, I mean, what was the initial response from the Keidanren when Mr. Mikitani made the announcement, said we're going to have all our meetings in English? What was the initial response from the Keidanren? That's ridiculous. You couldn't possibly do it. Really? I'm from Germany. We are extremely proud people. We play awesome soccer, right? We're really way better than Barcelona any day of the week, right? No, but in all seriousness, we're very, and we've got a great corporate culture, right? How, we speak English in the boardrooms of most of the major multinational corporations. And, ironically, I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's this pride thing. You said Neshin, right? I mean, the other thing, with it comes pride, right, that you've got. So that's a good thing, right? You want people to say no, right? But, is it commercial?
Do you? I'm sorry to add this question, but do you see the boardrooms changing?
Yeah, I do. And I always get thrown out of the room when I say that. Because how can you say that? It's not really happening. If you look at the age of this generational shift is happening.
I mean, in diversity. They want it. I know they want it. Several companies.
Okay, so can I tell you an anecdote? I mean, you guys are, you okay? Yeah? We wait until the next aftershake, right? Yeah? Okay. No, I love telling this anecdote, right? Because when I rejoined, the great company that I work with now, I said, I'm going to have to use my honeymoon period, right? And so I said, I want to hire 3 of the best and brightest, right? They said, oh, no problem, right? And so they do this thing, and it's like some recruiting thing, and there's like 2,000 people that apply, and they have some web-based aptitude test that I would probably fail massively, and they get it down to 50 people, right? And it's 50 people from the top 5 universities, right? About half boys, about half girls, right? And we say we do this thoroughly at my company, right? So it's fine, we have group interview, right? 5 people, 10 of those interviews, and it's me and one of my juniors and one of my seniors, and we sort of talk for an hour and a half and then pick 5, and then 5 do a little 2-day internship, and then we select the 3, right? So that was the sort of process, right? So there we are, we have the group interviews, right? And I mean, they all, of course, come up in their little sort of, manually approved, black suit and the right tie, and it's all wonderful, right? And, we sort of chat away and this, that, or the other, and they go, oh, Kodo-san, I want to work in global finance, I want to work in global research, I want to work for a global corporation, yuppie, 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 right? And then after about 45, 50 minutes, I switch into English, right? And I say, hey, last time you were overseas, what was the weirdest thing, the scariest thing, the funniest thing that happened to you? And all I want to do is test their English, right? All the girls, yup, 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 yup. 1 year in England, 2 years in Australia, a year in America, whatever. Of the guys, not even 7% had spent more than a week outside of Japan. And that's cool. Right? So you think about it. Why is that? Talk about diversity, right? These are from the top 5 universities, right? Todai, Keio, So, they can get a job anywhere, right? If you're a guy, if you're a girl, you can get a job anywhere, right? In one of the Fortune Japanese corporations. But the girls know, right, that for them, the escalator, once they're in the corporation, stops on the 2nd floor. So the girls create alpha. Right? The boys, I mean, in other public speeches, I say, I want to be reborn as a 22-year-old Japanese. Because once I'm in university, I'm done. I don't have to work anymore. I just have to show up, right? Sorry, I'm being a little bit facetious, but it's quite interesting, to see how actually in terms of talent development, right, how the Shanai Bunka and the internal HR structure of the major Japanese corporations actually acts to their detriment. And this is a big problem, potentially. Sorry, since I'm such a bull on Japan, look at this. You do this without globalizing your HR, good luck. It's going to be very challenging, right? Because if you think that you can have one The guy, you know, who goes on 5 years, right, to run the New York or to run the Brazil or to run the Afghanistan or to run the German operations, while everybody else is German or Turkish or whatever it is that they are, if that's your HR policy, you're going to die, right? So it's very interesting. You put your point in sort of a key development, you know, that you've actually got, right? The other thing, sorry, can I tell you say 5 minutes. Come on, you know, it's Friday night. There was an earthquake. We're alive, you know. No, but, you know, so the other anecdote, because I love this. I mean, recruiting is actually the biggest. I mean, look, I'm 52, right? And I mean, what do I know? I don't know anything about people in their 20s, right? I've got these teenage kids, and I wish, whatever, teenage, right? But I mean, you know, so it's very interesting. You go to, you know, the other recruiting we do is at the Boston Career Forum, right? I mean, that's the natural, it's a biased sample because everybody's global, right? When I go to the Boston Career Forum last year, you know, there were about 270 applicants, right? Half of them were Chinese. And half of them, they basically, of the Chinese kids, everybody had spent at least 2 or 3 years in Japan, at Koko, at high school, or at university, and they're now at graduate school somewhere in the States or in Australia or in England, right? But you know what? So 50% Chinese, they all speak fluent Japanese, right? 10% were, you know, double, half, Caucasian, whatever, and 40% Japanese kids, right? Of the 40% Japanese kids, right, about a third had spent at least 2 years in China learning Chinese. So it's interesting, right? Because you talk about who's the old guy? I'm the old guy because I cannot test whether they speak Chinese. I don't speak Chinese, right? So it's very interesting how, yes, there's a lot of Chinese and they're all very ambitious and they all learn Chinese because it's, you know, because Japan is a great place, right? But against that, for, you know, certainly one cohort of the Japanese young, right, they take that as a challenge, right? And, you know, so competition is actually working. So I always tell that, I point at you, you look a little older, and, you know, then no, but it's like, you know, I'm often in these meetings at the Keidanren or the Keizai Ryukai, and it's like, you know, the fallback position. It's like, oh, but the youth is terrible. You know, the young generation doesn't know this, doesn't know. When I was young, you know, it's like, when you were young, you know, whatever, right? You know, but so there is the young, the people are perfectly fine. I'm not worried about the Japanese people, but you're worried about some of the rigidities, you know, that you've got, right?
Thank you very much. And it's never too late to learn Chinese.
Oh, you have no idea. You know, you have no idea. I walked out after 3 days. I had no idea what that woman was talking about. It's like, it was nowhere to find. Learn German. It's a romantic language. You know that German is still the second most popular Daini Gaikokugo at Tokyo University. I'm very happy. Maybe that's a mark on Tokyo University.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you had a question, sorry.
My name is Roy Sheft from Israel. I work for a technology company.
A technology company, yeah.
Israeli technology company. And I'm spending in Japan many years, and I have no doubt that the private sector is really excellent. Yeah. I completely agree with everything you said, but the public sector.
But the public sector.
How do you think about the public sector? And you also talked about HR, and how many women are there here? And that's the other unused potential of Japan.
Okay, I can tell you where the women are. When I take my wife out to our weekly romantic dinner, we tend to be the only couple. And everybody else tends to be, you know, girl-girl couples, right? So the girls are out there spending, you know, the money. No, but, you know, in all seriousness, the public sector, right? It's obviously a big debate, right? Are you aware of the fact that the Japanese public sector this year is taking a pay cut of 7.8%, right? So, you know, there is actual, I showed you that chart, right? There is actual adjustment, you know, that is starting to come through, right? I think that the public sector in Japan has only one problem, and that problem is that there has been too frequent turnover in leadership. As a businessman, as an investor, I actually don't care who wins the election. I mean, I sort of care, But, you know, all I really want to know is you're going to be around. Once you're elected, you're going to be around. That the policies that you said you're going to do, you're going to try and implement. There will have to be some compromise. I will game you. That's my job in the private sector. But if the boss changes every 9 months, I don't know how to game you, right? Japanese corporations, right? One reason, I mean, I give you some other reasons, but one reason for why Japanese companies are leaving Japan, there's uncertainty over the tax regime. There's uncertainty over the labor regime, right? There's uncertainty over the energy regime. So if that's the uncertainty that there is, I might as well go to Bangladesh. Sorry, I'm being facetious, right? But I think that, you know, in terms of the public sector itself, Japanese bureaucrats are great. Japanese bureaucrats are in charge. Nothing can ever change. I don't believe that for 30 seconds. Because if you look at Nakasone, if you look at Koizumi, right? Once you're in power for more than 2 years, you do actually get things done. And things change, right? Now, they got changed back because afterwards you had a backlash within the LDP lost power, et cetera, but the key point is something that in academic circles is called regime uncertainty in Japan. The public sector itself, you know, is perfectly fine, works perfectly fine, right? Always huge, I'm German. Dozo. You didn't tell us your dream. Oh, come on, you know? Many dreams. To be able to fly every week. I can tell you from experience, you don't want that. I'm going to tell you funny, when I resigned from Merrill, when I resigned from Merrill Lynch, right, it was ridiculous because, you know, one of the things, blah, 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 right? It was all very amicable, et cetera, et cetera. But I said, like, you know, I calculated, right, that the number of trips that I'd taken, I think I'd gone, you know, I forget, I'd gone 60 times outside of Japan in the year, right? So I calculated that I'd spend a total of 3.5 days just in the Narita Express. That's not even counting all the time. I mean, it's like, that's my life. No, seriously, I mean, it's completely ridiculous. What did you mean? To fly to, in Japan? It might happen. You know, it might happen. It might happen.
Maybe one more question.
Only one more question. Who are you?
Okay. All right, hey, if you're all having fun, we can stay here for a little
your
bit more.
Your dream. We gotta end on time. You're Japanese. Go ahead. You had a question. So.
Thank you. My name is Hiroyuki Takeshima from East Japan Railway Company. So thank you for riding Narita Express. Yes. Now, maybe 1/3 or 2/3 of younger generation is part-time worker. And it means they can't get proper training or good education as professional. Or preparing for more complex jobs like management. So in the long run, corporate Japan's competitiveness will be weakened by that situation. So my question is, what do you think about it? Now, world is age of war for talent. So I'm just about pessimistic.
What prevents you from hiring these people full time? Sorry, I'm being kibishi.
High cost and global competition. Maybe.
Not for JR East.
In general.
No, but look, what's the name of the guy? I mentioned the richest man of Japan, Mr. Mikitani, fast retailing. 3.5 years ago. Yanai, sorry, huh? Yanai. What did I say? God. He's a playboy, or Yanai-san isn't. Oh, really? He's a playboy? Is that what he said? No, sorry. Why did I hear that? Sorry. This is bad. No, but look, you know, Yanai-san, you remember 3.5 years ago, right? He rehired all his part-time employees on a full-time basis. Precisely because of the point that you made, which is a very valid point. I have Shanai Bunka. I have some skill set that you can only acquire in my company. And by the way, I want you in my company to be a culture carrier of that Shanai Bunka, right? And you're right. With a part-time worker, I cannot do that, right? Absolutely correct. what prevents you from actually just hiring these people on a full-time basis? Because I got to take care of profitability? You're kidding me. Since when do corporations in Japan take care of profitability? I mean, sorry, it's I'm being logical. I'm being a little facetious. Of course, you want to take care of cost. But if you really believe that there is a efficiency loss by not training people up, oh, we've got to hire people. I mean, come on, the Zaikai in Japan, I mean, my point of view, and so now I'm being too blunt, right? The problem in Japan is not the Kankai, so it's not the, you know, what is it, the technocrats. I don't think it's the politicians, because politicians are paid for by the business community. In my opinion, the bad part about Japan, unfortunately, is the business community. You know, because the business community actually does not have a focus, right? Look at Sharp Corporation. Now I'm being far too blunt. You know, Sharp Corporation, if dollar-yen were at 100, it would still be a bad company. That's unfortunately the truth. Great engineering, great Shiteki Zaisan, but you're running a company, guys. でしょ? ごめん、ちょっと厳しい。
Dankeschön.
Oh. Any additional questions? Or we all should go home? What do you think? Anybody? No? Listen, thank you very, very much. You didn't, by the way, typically Japanese, you didn't tell me what your dream was.
As I said, I'm working for railway company, so expand Japanese punctual railway system overseas.
Punctual railway system. This is very good.
Thank you.
This is very good. I was shocked when I go back to Germany now, you know, that actually half the trains are late, which is very, when I was growing up, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole, for a wonderful...